to our psychological safety virtual boardroom that's been facilitated by HR Recruit and Maddison-Greenwell. Sorry, Kate Maddison-Greenwell, missed the important bit off there. Sorry, Kate. My name's Jo Thompson and I'm a consultant for HR Recruit. I'm joined today by Kate, who will introduce herself shortly. Kate is going to take us through how to establish psychological safety in teams and the benefits it can give to leadership teams that are struggling in today's world. If you've got any burning questions during the session, then please put them into the chat box facility. But as there's a lot of content to go through, we have allowed time at the end for the Q&A session. I'm now going to hand you over to Kate, who will introduce herself and start the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jo. Hello, everybody. I'm Kate. You can call me Maddison if you want, but generally I answer to Kate. I used to get called Maddison Avenue at school. It brought back horrific memories there. Thanks, Jo. So we're going to be talking about psychological safety today. So hopefully that's what you're all expecting. If not, you're in the wrong meeting. But that's what we're going to be talking about today. So our aims for today is to talk about psychological safety in teams. I've got a little story about a team that I worked with. We're going to be hopefully giving some tips on mental well-being, reducing documentation, the impact of psychological safety on employee experience and engagement, and also sharing with you some things like blameless retrospectives and building a social contract as well, things that have helped me with building psychological safety in the teams that I have worked with. So a quick introduction to myself. I am Kate and I founded People Efficient about 18 months ago because I wanted to reimagine how HR gets done. So we're specialists in rapidly growing businesses and we roll out things like people and HR strategy. We do lots of digital transformation, all in the context of culture and change. We also look after and lead on HR projects and offer leadership support as well. And we also have Agile in HR, which is all about bringing Agile into HR and leadership teams to help them in a rapidly evolving and changing world. So psychological safety, why on earth do we need it? Well, as I'm sure you all appreciate and understand, because of the environments that you're working in, we are in an incredibly VUCA world, which is a volatile, uncertain, chaotic and ambiguous world. And there's lots of reasons for it, not least of all, the after effects of things like COVID and the change that it's brought for businesses. And Dr. Amy Edmondson in 1999 coined psychological safety as a belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas or questions, concerns or mistakes. And she found that the difference between success and failure was not determined by management support or resources or project leader status or even expertise. She found that instead the differences in how the success was framed by each leader gave rise to different attitudes about things like technology and the need for teamwork. And a key insight from her work was that psychological safety is not a personality difference, but rather a feature of the workplace that leaders can and really should be helping to create. So more specifically, in every company or organisation that I've worked at or supported, even with some famously strong corporate cultures, psychological safety differed quite substantially across groups or across teams. And that's because psychological safety is not the result of a random or elusive group kind of chemistry. It's more about embracing it, understanding it, and being purposeful about psychological safety. So let's pop in the chat. I've got a question for you, and I would love to know what kind of behaviours that you see or you're likely to see in teams that don't feel psychologically safe. So pop in the chat and let me know what kind of behaviours you've seen or you think you might see in teams that perhaps don't feel safe to speak up or to ask questions or raise concerns. So Gemma, definitely that is a real flag. Not speaking up during meetings, absolutely. Hesitating, being withdrawn, feeling reserved. Oh, wow, you're hitting me with lots of them. Talking about others. Yes, Erica, absolutely. That kind of gossipy. I don't know whether anybody's ever experienced the meeting after the meeting, the side meetings to talk about what's just happened in the meeting. Defensiveness, not my job. Absolutely, yes. Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. So you know, and you can recognize when teams or businesses or cultures are not psychologically safe. And you can also argue that there are, that there are small impacts, but there are also bigger impacts. So we talked about some of the bits that you've put in the chat there. Some of those things may start off as having a small impact, but they can grow into having really quite big repercussions for businesses. So you could argue that things like disasters like the VW emissions scandal or Enron or the global financial crisis that happened, those kind of things may not have occurred if the teams in those organizations had possessed psychological safety or a higher level of psychological safety, which we're going to go through. If they were able and felt safe to speak up and they were listened to and action was taken, then potentially these bigger impacts could have at the very least been reduced, or if not prevented all the way through. So it starts with that kind of smaller behaviours, but if left unchecked, it can really result in quite big disasters reputationally and otherwise for businesses. And if we think about the reasons for this, if we think about those of us that went to school in a traditional environment, well, school is kind of set up to reward success and also to please or appease hierarchy. So if we think back, we spend our formative years waiting for those in authority to pass or fail us in assignments, in our homework and exams and tests and things like that. And our focus is always on end results. So we're kind of programmed to fear failing a little bit, and we're also programmed a little bit to accept other people's validations as the sole seal of approval. So it's easy to see why that can happen, and it's all about kind of reframing that psychological safety. So there's stages to psychological safety, and every team takes different paths to the different stages, which we're going to go through. So it can be useful to describe these stages to help people understand that psychological safety is not a binary on and off phenomenon. So you can't just do a couple of things and switch that psychological safety button on. There's lots of different ways that you can evolve psychological safety. And people in teams will move through these and they'll go forwards and backwards. They may skip stages. They may move into and across different stages in different contexts. Sometimes the time of day can have a bit of an impact, or where a team is at, are they a new team that's been put together? So it's useful to think about the environments of increasing psychological safety and how that actually manifests. And we'll go through some of these stages now. So the first stage is inclusion safety. So we all want to feel included, we long to belong, and we humans need to feel accepted in a team before we can be heard. So essentially the first stage is simply being comfortable about being present. So this stage means that all members should be included and welcomed without discrimination regarding gender and age and social background and neurodiversity and all those other things. In a team at this stage, members will feel safe to belong to the team. So they should feel comfortable being present and they don't feel excluded, and feel that they are wanted and appreciated. So that's the first stage of psychological safety. It's about being inclusive and making sure that everybody feels welcomed. The second stage is learner safety. And this means being able to ask questions and give and receive feedback, experiment, and also quite critically make mistakes. So team members at this stage will provide feedback to each other, and they will also ask for feedback themselves. So a team that's at this stage has members that are able to learn through asking questions. So team members here may be able to experiment and make and also admit small mistakes and ask for help. So that's the second stage. Then we have the third stage, which is contributor safety. So this means being able to participate as a member of the team and contribute ideas and suggestions and perhaps raise threats or threats into the team. They're not actually raising threats. So raise threats into the team and risk using members' individual talents and abilities to contribute to the team without fear. So at this stage, retrospectives, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, and postmortems can become really powerful practices. So at the contributor safety stage, members feel safe to contribute their own ideas without fear of embarrassment or ridicule. And it is a more challenging state because volunteering your own ideas can increase the sort of psychosocial vulnerability of team members. But it's a great place to be in, because even if an idea that's put forward is perhaps not a useful idea at the time, it can often spark other inspiration from other people, and it can evolve. So having people feel free to say what they think or ideas that they have is really, really critical at this stage. And then we have the final stage, and this is challenger safety. So this means being able to challenge the way that the team works and come up with new ways of working, behaviours, challenging the ideas of others, even ideas of senior members. So this is the most powerful stage, if you like, of psychological safety, because it not only allows new ideas to surface and learning from mistakes to occur, but it can also prevent potentially bad ideas from getting into the real world. So at the challenger safety stage, members can question others, including those in authority. They can question their ideas or suggest significant changes to ideas or plans or ways of working. So one of the other interesting things about these 4 stages is that if someone on the team is at a significantly different stage to the others in the team, it can feel highly discordant. And so it's important to think about increasing the psychological safety of all of the team, bringing everyone along together at a similar pace. So at the increasing stages of psychological safety, team members become more and more happy. And very few high-performing teams are unhappy, but high-performing teams are not happy because they're high-performing. They're high-performing because they're happy. So there's a real link there into how psychological safety can help and facilitate that high performance that businesses are wanting. So those are the stages of psychological safety. So I wanted to talk to you about a team that I supported that was struggling. And this isn't the actual team, this is just a stock image. It's not real people. But they are representative of this team that I supported. They were really struggling. They were struggling within the business. They were struggling with each other. And they really were at very different stages of psychological safety. And there were lots of behaviours that quickly became apparent as I was observing. So all of the decisions had to follow an approval procedure, even really small ones. And because it was quite a large company, this took a long time, and it was a real bone of contention for lots of people. It was everything from swapping shifts to changing hours slightly to accommodate an emergency need, and all the way through to sort of changing suppliers. Just everything had to go through exactly the same approval process, and somebody quite high up would approve them. And when it came to things like swapping shifts and what have you, it was just incredibly frustrating. There was also a lot of emails. I don't know whether anybody can relate, but there were a lot of emails. Everybody's inboxes were incredibly full. And there was lots of CCing going on and BCCing, and lots of people offering lots of different thoughts and opinions, which was also very frustrating for this particular team. And that was driving things like turnover. So there was a really high turnover, and it was having quite a dramatic effect on the team and then on the business as well. There were also things like really complicated procedures. So there was a spreadsheet that 40 people had access to in order to keep it up to date, and it kept corrupting. But the decision to change it and evolve it into something that could be really useful kept being avoided. There were very long policies. I think there was sort of like a 70-page handbook for new starters. And during that process, they had to read and sign every page before they started working, because the company was very risk avoidant. And then the biggest clue, well, there were two other really big clues. And one of them was that leaders held meetings several times a day. So they had a start-off meeting in the morning, and then a catch-up meeting at lunchtime, and then they had a round-off meeting at the end of the day, and then lots of different meetings in between, sort of one-to-ones and sort of individual catch-ups as well. Their days were sort of really full of meetings, so much so that they then worked really long hours to keep on top of their work. And the majority of their meetings were update meetings. So they felt that they needed to do that to keep on top, because they didn't feel that there was transparency, and they weren't sure what was going on. And all of these things sort of added up to there being an issue with when the business needed to pivot. So, for example, when COVID came along, they were incredibly slow to be able to adapt or to change. So that caused some really big issues for them. They weren't able to pivot. They weren't able to make the changes that were needed to be able to respond really quickly to look after their employees and also protect the business as well. So you can imagine it was a difficult time for them, but every team has to start somewhere. So what did I do? Well, first of all, I observed, and after that observation period, it was clear that there were lots of miscommunications, unhealthy conflicts, lack of empathy, and misunderstandings. So the majority of the communications were over Zoom. And people were sort of scattered throughout the UK as well. So I held a virtual collaboration session, and one of the first things I did was build a social contract. So I explained head on the challenges that we were going to face. I talked about where the business needed to be, what was holding the business back, and I asked them to come with me on that journey. We needed the team to support a change that was going to happen because the business was venturing into a new market. And we started to explore the things that might be holding us back. And we talked about what needed to happen for us as a team to get through this and then to flourish in the future. So we agreed a social contract, and we agreed the process for when that social contract needed to be challenged. So I'll just share with you what that social contract looked like. So we tried to make it fun. We did some engaging sort of team building type things before we went into this social contract. And then we asked people to talk about what they needed to start to feel safe within the team. So we looked at all of those things, and then we signed them off. And the one thing that was that really came through, and it was kind of the thread that we talked about all the time, and I felt like I was saying it over and over again, but it really started to drive things home, was that we agreed that we would always come from the belief that everyone is doing their best. So whenever we were challenging something, we weren't saying, this person has let us down, or this person hasn't done this right, or this person has caused me distress. It was always, okay, the person's doing their best. Let's look at the process. Let's look at the communication. Let's look at the issue rather than the person. And that was really quite transformative. It took us a little while to get there, but that was quite transformative for the team. And it did mean that I had to keep repeating that, to really drill that in. We started as well to kind of reframe conflict. So we started to explore what conflict was, and we agreed a process for resolving that. So we started to view conflict as an opportunity to see if there were other ways of doing things rather than it being a person-to-person issue. So that was something else that we did. Then we started looking at the employee experience. So we chose this because there were two main challenges that we were facing. So retention was one, and attraction in a new market that the business was going into was another. So we agreed that we would start with us, and we went through an empathy mapping exercise. And in this team that I was working with, there were HR generalists, L&D, payroll and administrators. So different specialists at different levels as well. So we went through an empathy mapping exercise, and that involved putting ourselves into the shoes of other people and then comparing what we felt was there, was going on for them and their frustrations and their ambitions. And then we compared it. We actually put that out to those people and asked them to comment, and then we started to compare. So we got into teams of 2 to 3, and we started to explore different roles, and we asked the people in those roles to share as well. And over the course of about 4 weeks, we used these skills to do a deeper dive into the employee experience using this method so that we could better understand others, both inside and outside of the team. And it was eye-opening. There were so many assumptions that were made about what other people were wanting to do or achieve, or some of their behaviors and where their frustrations were coming from and their pain points. It was incredibly eye-opening, and also it really helped us with our empathy as well, because I started to see that the team were asking a lot more questions after this exercise. So they would ask people how their days were, they would ask people how their projects were working, because they had a bit more of an insight, which was really nice to see. And then once we'd done this empathy mapping, we then started to dig deeper to understand what was impacting on the employee experience and engagement. And we started to look at small ticket items as well as big ticket items. So it can sometimes be easy, even though it's not the easiest place to start from, but it can sometimes be easy to think we need to do something radical. We need to introduce a new system, or we need to introduce a new platform, or communication isn't working well. We need to implement Slack, or we need to implement something else, which can often be big projects that take a long time to deliver. So we started to look at, actually, from our empathy mapping exercise, we started to look at some of the small ticket items. What were the small frustrations? What were the small pain points that people were experiencing? What could we do to help to solve those things, to remove just one frustration from somebody, to help with some quick wins, and to help with changing perspectives? And we started to identify some of the frustration points. And there were lots of them. People couldn't find information. There was lack of availability because of the amount of meetings that people were going to. There were long delays in replies. Emails were getting lost. People outside of the people team were just as frustrated as the people within it. There was unequal opportunities to speak up in meetings. So it's great that somebody said that earlier. There were overrunning meetings, and far too many of them. The storage of documents was unstructured, and people were frustrated because they couldn't find things. There were lots of manual and admin burdensome, is that even a word? Admin burdensome onboarding. So the onboarding had a lot of admin. And there was also not enough human time for people. So the people team were kind of like heads down, bums in the air, rattling out lots of different things, but they didn't have time for people, and they didn't have time to build relationships, and it was damaging them from the inside, but also damaging their credibility outside, within the business. And once we started to understand the impact within the team and the wider company, we were able to start looking at those smaller ticket items and work towards the bigger ticket items. So on the practical side, we started to reflect, and I'm going to talk about retrospectives in a moment, but we started to be able to reflect on what we could do that would really help the people team to raise their credibility and to reduce this noise and this unhappiness that was festering within the team. So on a practical side, we were able to identify that if we automated a couple of processes, that would free up some time. So we automated the onboarding and the IT process. And for this particular team, we use Microsoft 365 and Power Automate. There are some HR information systems that can do that for you as well, but this team didn't have the budget to make the changes that they needed to there. So we looked at what we had, which was Power Automate. We also created a People Matters hub on SharePoint so that it was all of the documents just went to the same place. And whenever there was something new, we communicated that through the news pages. And we also created a people dashboard for transactional items. So whenever there were things like new starters or leavers or a contract variation needed to be done, or an exit interview or anything like that, we started to use Microsoft Forms. And these were all ideas that came out of the team. We started to use those and they automatically all went to the same dashboard so that we could all see what was happening at all different stages and we could hop in and help each other. So it really built this kind of transparent way of working where people were able to say, can you help me on this? Or the leader could understand that there was a delay somewhere. So that we used to do things like swarming. So we would all spend, 3 of us would spend half an hour in a particular area, like new starters, getting those done. And then we would go back to our jobs just to help unblock and unstick. So we started to work as a team and it was a lot more cohesive and collaborative. And because of these things, we were then able to make some more significant changes as well. So over time, as we raised our credibility, we started being a little bit braver and we started doing things like removing sort of weekly documented one-to-ones across the company. And yes, I did say weekly and I did say documented. It was quite something, but we were able to remove those and replace them with we called them coffee chats, but I'm sure there's lots of different variations where they're informal, they're not documented, and they're more of, well, they're less of an update and more of a how are you. So we started doing things like that because people felt braver to suggest it, but also the company and the team felt braver because they knew what was happening within the business. So they didn't feel the need to constantly have this documented communication all the time. And then that drove some differences in behavior. So we started looking at things like meetings and we started giving people equal speaking time in meetings, but also, and this was something that was quite critical, we gave opportunities for introverts to put their thoughts in prior to the meeting because not everybody wants to voice their thoughts. So we used whiteboards because, again, we were scattered across the UK. So we used virtual whiteboards. And we would publish the agenda first and we would give people the opportunity to write their thoughts before the meeting and then we would discuss them. So we were making sure that people had opportunities to speak up, even if they didn't feel that they could do that face-to-face or virtually face-to-face. And we also started to celebrate failure. I mean, we didn't have parties every time something went wrong, but we did start to thank people for pointing things out. We did start to, give people credit for stopping what could have been a disaster. And we really reframed that. And one of the things that I used to say a lot was, listen, I'll make my own mistakes. You make your own mistakes. Please don't make the same mistakes that I have, because I've now shared with you how I did it, so that you can learn from that. So we started to really, embrace that mistakes are going to happen, and it is just another stage in the journey to being a better team. So one of the ways that we did that was by having something called retrospectives, and I call them blameless retrospectives. So we started to introduce them. We did them every fortnight to begin with, and then once the team started to mature and we went through the stages of psychological safety, we made them every 3 weeks. And the focus is on the impact and not on the person. So again, we did a mixture of this. When we got together, we tried to have retrospectives when we got together, which was once a quarter. But when it was virtual, we would do it on Miro. That's my favorite one. But you can also use Mural. Teams has got a whiteboard. Zoom has got a whiteboard as well. And there are lots of different templates on there. But the important thing is that it's focusing on the impact and not the person. So it's we do things like we use voting, we use asynchronous methods, we account for the introverts, as I was saying before, and we agreed the focus areas and continually kept it fresh. So the theme for retrospectives is always about, you know, what do we need to continue doing? What should we start doing? What should we stop doing? But also, what should we do next? Let's look at what the priorities. Has anything changed? Are we, you know, what's our scope? Who needs support, and how can we do that? How can we do things differently to make it better next time? And it's always focused on the process or the impact or the problem rather than the person. So there is no finger pointing. There is no, you know, when you said this, I said that. There's none. We don't do any of that. What we do is we say, you know, when we delivered, we made a commitment to deliver something and we delivered it late. Let's explore why that happened. And sometimes it comes up with, you know, I was delayed because I didn't get an email in time, and then we might explore why that happened. But everybody has to come at it from a perspective of everyone's doing their best, and also we're looking to improve. We're not looking to blame, we're only looking to improve. And there's lots of fun things you can do with retrospective. It's one of my most favourite things to do. We have themed retrospectives. One of my favorites is the Friends one, because I'm Friends obsessed. Yes, I am of that age. And another one that I did with the team was a Marvel one, and we gamified it. It was very exciting, and you know, it's important to keep it fresh. It's also important to understand your team and what they like. So don't hit them with a Marvel Avengers one straight away. Maybe hit them with a you know, a simple start and stop, and continue. But as you get braver, and if you want people to keep wanting and looking forward to retrospectives and understanding them for what they are, try and keep them fresh. But there's loads of different templates on the virtual whiteboards, and you can also adapt them in real life as well, using good old stickies. So what we saw as we went through this process, what we saw over time was a more united team that understood that change was inevitable, and also that they could rely on each other for support to adapt. And there was an attitude of sharing without oversharing, but to take mitigated risks, knowing that it won't be embarrassing to fail. So by focusing on the employee experience, it meant that we could establish better and clearer ways of doing things that then impacted directly onto mental health and mental well-being. So I've come to the end of this. I wanted to leave some space for questions as well. I have got some free resources for you. So understanding where your team is at on the psychological safety scale, and also 10 ways to introduce psychological safety to your team. So Jo can talk about how you can get that in just a second. And also, if you are looking to implement psychological safety, I do run in-house courses and programs and give ongoing leadership support and project management consultancy as well. So if you're interested in that, I'm happy to give you a free 30-minute consultation, and I will pop that in the chat in just a second. I'll pop you the link. So I will hand back over to Jo, and I will prepare myself for a good old grilling. For anybody that's brave enough to do so.
There's no questions on there at the minute, Kate, but if anyone either wants to shout out or put any questions in the chat, now's your opportunity. Either that, or everyone understood it so well, Kate, they don't need any questions.
Oh, yes, absolutely. It was the number one rule. It was a bit of a jokey one, just where it was the classic, what are people wearing when they're on Zoom? They might have the top on, but we want to make sure that everybody's wearing something on the bottom as well. So it was back in the old COVID days. So yeah, or skirts is fine as well. Just some kind of, bottom garment. Yeah, I was concerned when I saw it as well, Sam. God knows what happened before I came. Maybe everybody was naked underneath. Who knows? So I think there's a couple of others as well. I'm just going through. Experience, is there a different approach for senior or executive leadership teams versus wider organizational roles? So I'm not sure what you mean, Hamish, by versus wider organizational roles, but I think maybe what you mean is definitely I would approach things differently for an executive leadership team. So I definitely wouldn't start with an Avengers Marvel retrospective. But what I would probably do with an executive leadership team is talk about, some of the statistics. I would want to explore, the reasons, the challenges that they're facing and the reasons for it. So if it is that they have just experienced a problem where perhaps they've tried to pivot or they're trying to launch something and it's taking a long time, or they are experiencing really high turnover, I link that to the ways in which things are being done. And I give them some statistics in terms of the cost of retention, the cost of continual training and retraining, and also link it to their aspirations for the business as well. And there is, in Agile, there is a framework where you have stakeholders and you invite stakeholders in to see what's going on in the business, a bit like a show and tell. So I would start to talk to them about their role as stakeholders within the business, and how and when and why they would want to see how things are progressing. So I'd probably start to talk to them a little bit about that. With more junior teams or newer teams or those that are just starting on this kind of path, I would try and make it fun and energetic and something that they would want to look forward to. So hopefully that's answered your question. If not, let me know. What was the time period for this project? Excellent question, Wendy. I did 5 minutes. That was all it took. It was great. Everybody just got it straight away. And yeah, no. I wish. So the time period for the project was 3 months. I was supporting them from a consultancy perspective. The reason it took such a long time is because, trying to think of a delicate way of saying this, they really were in dire straits. They had pretty much a walkout from some quite key personnel. So it was kind of like an emergency, right? We need to do something about this. The proverbials hit the fan. So it was really important for me to spend 2 weeks. I spent 1 week understanding from the executive team what their perspective of the problem was. And then I spent another, it was over a week actually, I think it was 8 days, with the people team and also some other key stakeholders to understand the perspective from their side. And as you can probably imagine, there were aspects from both, and there were other things that were unearthed as well. But I used that time to really talk about, instead of these big projects, let's understand how things get done. So yeah, it was over 3 months, which you do need that time. You do need that cycle to start to have that impact and to go through those stages. I might mispronounce this name, Henna or Hina. I think it's Henna. I love this. So can you talk to the relation between psychological safety and radical candor? Absolutely. I love radical candor. So that is all about, being able to be honest and understanding that conflict is not a bad thing. Conflict is a stepping stone to improvement. But it's about making sure that people understand that and understand that honesty, and how it's framed. So yeah, there's definitely a great link between the two things. So starting from understanding psychological safety and how and why that impacts the business, through to how you actually communicate that candor. They both go hand in hand. So in my courses, I talk about how you can frame and phrase conversations and have those courageous conversations, and those conversations with candor, and how it contributes to psychological safety. Sam has a serious question. I'm glad to see it, Sam. How did you know it was successful? I think it says as in, I seem to have a logo that's come up, as in there was a definitive measure for success. Yes, absolutely. We knew that there were a couple of KPIs that we put in place at the beginning. So the first one, and we put them in place together as a team. So I didn't put these KPIs in place. We agreed them together as a team. The first one was to do with retention within the people team. The second one was to do with retention in the operations team, which was the next stage on. And the third one was we did a survey at the beginning about, we were really brave, and we did a survey at the beginning about what people felt about the people team and what their frustrations were, which is how we found out about things like delays to replying, that people weren't available, there was a bit of a toxic atmosphere, all of those kinds of things. And then we did a survey at the end of the 3 months, after having promoted the journey that the people team were going through. We did a survey afterwards, and I think the trust scores, I can't remember the trust scores exactly, but it was in the 40s at the beginning and it was in the 70s at the end, but I can't remember the exact number. Our aspiration was to be in the 80s, and we did talk about how we would feel if we didn't quite hit that, and we did fall short of those 80s. So then when we were talking about failures, we talked about how to reframe that 70s was much better than the 40s. Okay, and then I think there's just one last question. I've got 1 minute to answer it, and it's from Foster. Can ISO, I never know how to pronounce these, 45003 implementation help to improve mental health at the workplace? I will be absolutely honest with you, Foster, I'm not sure about the ISO accreditations. It's not my area of expertise, but anything that contributes to mental health is great in my book. The way that I feel about mental health and mental well-being is that rather than looking at it as a big challenge to solve, I always think that looking at how things are done and the ways of working will always have a bigger impact on people's mental well-being than the big ticket items. Like, I mean, we'll never turn it down, but, you know, an extra day's holiday or you know, a super duper EAP or whatever it is, I don't think those have a really direct impact or immediate impact on mental well-being. But looking at how things are done, how we communicate, the ways in which we're working does. And you can chip away at those things. You can chip away and make those improvements bit by bit, and people can see that you're doing it, and that can really help as well. How's that for timing, Jo?
Absolutely perfect. Well done. Okay, so thanks very much to everybody that's attended today. I hope you've enjoyed the session. We're going to send out some correspondence to everyone that signed up for the event this afternoon, and I put a post on LinkedIn. So if you want a copy of Kate's slides and the recording, then please put a comment against the post. Our next event is on the 4th of May, and it's Understanding and Challenging Our Limiting Beliefs. A link to sign up for this will be included on the email. We're also going to send out a survey to everyone that signed up as well. So please feel free to complete the survey for feedback on the event. And finally, if anyone is recruiting, we've also got accountancy recruit and FD recruit within the group. But finally, I'd just like to say a massive thanks to Kate for your time and effort in putting the event together, and to everybody for signing up. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you.
I've put my LinkedIn link on there, and also the consultation link as well. So that's in the chat. So thank you so much for everybody, and thank you for the questions as well. They were brilliant.